Good evening, everyone. We continue today with Second Kings chapter 18. I think it would be useful for us to have a recap because God had allowed the Assyrians to come and show their hand against Menachem at this point in time to shore up the power grab of Menachem. And then at the time of Pekah, then we find that Akkad had actually gone into an alliance with Assyria, and this would be Tiglath-Pileser, and he would be giving tribute. Then sometime thereafter, Shalmaneser came and took Hosea, the northern kingdom, into tribute, meaning they became a vassal state. So for 9 years, Hosea was giving money to Shalmaneser. And then at the end of the ninth year, he decided that he would go at it himself, and he had sought the help of the king of Egypt. And we saw that in Second Kings chapter 17. Now, what is important is that as the development went on, Hosea thought that he was safe, and then Shalmaneser came and took siege, conquered the northern cities, took siege of Samaria, and then in 2 3 years took the entire city. The capital of the northern kingdom, Samaria, was captured. And then thereafter, in the 14th year of Hezekiah, which we read here yesterday, and then in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, then we have Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. He marched against all the fortified cities of Judah and seized them. And here we see this would be the fourth Assyrian king. Now, I think we need to understand that as we look at history, the kings of Assyria became stronger and stronger and stronger, to the point that they didn't only want a vassal state, but they want to conquer the place. And so Shalmaneser did just that, took over Samaria, brought the people out to places that is in the Medes. And then he brought people from outside to the northern kingdom in Israel. So we read all this in Second Kings chapter 17. And these are the Goyim, the nations, particularly the Kuthians. They brought their own gods. And we will read about that today. Right now, we are on the 14th year of Hezekiah, and he is met with Sennacherib. We read in verse 14. Verse 14 tells us, and then Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent messengers to the king of Assyria at Lachish. The Lachish is a bit southwest of Jerusalem. And he says, I have done wrong. I have sinned. This is the word sinned. This is where we left off. I have sinned. Return from me. Go back to Assyria. Whatever you tell me to do to pay, I will pay. And so the king of Assyria imposed on Hezekiah the payment of 300 discs of silver and 30 discs of gold. Now, this is where we left off yesterday, and continuing on today into verse 15. We find in verse 15, and then, so we have a missing word here, and then Hezekiah gave him all the silver in the house of the Lord. As you can tell, we have seen that the Akkad has given, and now Hezekiah is giving. It's as if that the the coffers of the temple of God, the house of God, seems to be a bottomless pit. The kings kept raiding the house of God and the treasuries of the king's house and gave him everything. Hezekiah cut off from the doors of the temple of the Lord, if you recall, in First Kings chapter 8, when Solomon had dedicated the temple. In the previous two chapters, in chapters 6 and 7, we saw how Solomon had meticulously built the temple, and everything was covered with gold overlay indoors. And so he cut off the gold from the doorposts, which King Hezekiah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. Now, what we are not told here is that everything that he had asked for in verse 14, the gold and the silver melted from all the doors and whatever pillars that has been coated with gold leaves or gold sheets, are now barren. Now, we read in verse 17, be advised that this word here is and then. After a period of time, we don't know how long, but I don't think it's that long after verse 16, after a hefty tribute that Sennacherib had asked from Hezekiah. And we noted that in each of these instances, the northern kingdom could have repented, he didn't. Ahaz could have repented, he didn't. But here, Hezekiah had cleaned up the whole place. And yet, the king of Assyria was able to come and threaten King Hezekiah. We read the king of Assyria sent Tartan, and then we need to read these names. In verse 17, we have Tartan, and then we have Rav Saris, the head of the rabbi, if you want to call it, because in modern day, the word Rav is short for Rabbi. So Rav Saris, another leader, possibly a Jewish turncoat, if you like, that had left the faith, that had abandoned Israel, and had sought refuge with the king of Assyria, likely from the northern kingdom. And then we have another called Rav Shakeh, another big man. Rav means big, knowledgeable. And that is how the Jews address some of the teachers. So here we have Rav Saris, and then we have Rav Shakeh, two rabbis, if you want to call it that way, or two big men from Lachish, and then went to King Hezekiah with a large army. And this is important. The army of Sennacherib was huge. They went to Jerusalem, and then they went up and then came to Jerusalem. And when they went up, they came and then stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is on the road to the fullest field where people go to wash clothes. Verse 18. And then they called to the king to talk. And then the king had sent Eliakim, the son of Hilkiyahu, who was in charge of the household. Now, he is the chief of the house, if you like to say that. And then we have Shevna, the scribe. And to talk about Shevna, I think it would be useful for us to read Isaiah, and in chapter 22, verses 15 to 20. And also useful for us to remember that at this point in time, we already have Isaiah in the palace. But Second Kings doesn't talk about Isaiah just yet. So if you go back to Isaiah chapter 22, you'll read about Shebna. And then we have Joach, the son of Asaph, the recorder. Here it calls the secretary, the recorder. Meaning, when he is there, he would write down and record everything that has happened and who said what. And so the recorder is probably the one who provides all the writings to the Tanakh narratives. Went out to them, 19. And then Rabshakeh said to them, say now to Hezekiah. And this would be a very insolent speech. Why? Because he does not refer to Hezekiah as king. He refers to Assyria as king. This is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. What is this confidence that you have? Now, this word confidence, again, it is from the word batak. We have dealt with it yesterday. This is the trust in Jehovah. No matter what, Hezekiah was honorable and faithful to God, cleaned up the place, and even when the king of Assyria came, it didn't matter because he did what was right before God. And God allowed the northern kingdom to be taken over by the Assyrians because they never repented from Hamas, from mistreating the people, from idolatry, and God gave them up. So interestingly speaking, when Tilgat-Pileser came, Ahaz was already promised by God that he will not be destroyed because God will always want to maintain the seat of David on the throne. Now that when it came to Hezekiah, he did everything that was right, and yet the Assyrians came. And so Rabshakeh was asking, so what is this thing? Who are you trusting? Why are you so confident? Rabshakeh is now accusing them. You say, but they are only empty words. It says these are all idle words. You have relied on things that is only by pure speech. What does that mean? It means that they are only relying on words to pray. You can pray to God, but I have a plan and strength for the war. If we engage in war, the reality is you will lose. Now, on whom have you relied that you have revolted against me? Now, this word here is marat. Marat is to rebel. Just like Hosea turned to Egypt, the Pharaoh, to defend Hosea, but in the end, obviously, the Pharaoh had abandoned Hosea and they were conquered. And so now Rabshakeh says, whatever you are saying, they are empty words. You can pray, you can plan, but on sheer strength, you will lose. Now tell me, what gave you the idea that you can go against Sennacherib, the great king of Assyria? Now, what gave it away? Hezekiah did not turn to anyone, not Egypt, and nobody else around. And we read in the opening verses of chapter 18 that his character was that his trust is in God, his confidence is in Jehovah. As Jehovah has given them the land, Jehovah will defend the land for them. But it is up to God to do so. What he does is what he can do as a king. So he made peace, gave the tribute, but yet Sennacherib is not happy. Sennacherib wants to do more. Isaiah 22 gives us a little glimpse of the other side of the story. But we continue with verse 21. It says, now look, you have relied, you have trusted. This word would be trusted. They seem to think that just like Hosea, he turned to the Egyptians, and that Hezekiah would also do the same. But they didn't realize their trust is in God. So you have relied on the support of this broken reed. Now, in verse 21, where it says the broken reed, it is better translated as the splinter reed. Splinter reed for support. Now, what does that mean? A splinter reed is made of splinter of the wood, which is very brittle. Basically, very brittle wood that when it breaks, little pieces can cut and poke into your flesh. So that is what he means by a splinter reed. You are depending on this splinter reed for support. And so he says, on Egypt, on which if a man leans on, it will go into his hand and pierce it like a splinter. That is how Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is to all who rely on him, just like how Hosea had depended on him. And when Shalmaneser came in the 12th year, they wiped out Samaria. However, if you say to me, we have trusted in the Lord our God. Now, remember, this is Rav Shakir. Rav Shakir is now being very insolent. You depend on Egypt, you're a stupid man because Egypt will not help you, just like Hosea. Then you said, if we actually trusted, have confidence in Jehovah, our God. And Rav Shakir seems to know much about God. Is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah had removed? Now we read in the earlier chapters, Hezekiah cleaned up the place, including the private altars, the Bama. These are the Bama. And has said to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem, which is at the temple. Now then, in verse 23, it says, now come make a wager with my master, king of Assyria. Now this idea in verse 23, it's not really a bet. So let us not think that way. This would be better as a security guarantee. Meaning, if you give to my master, then I can give you something in return of protection. And so he says this, I will give you 2,000 horses. That's a lot. And then the sarcasm comes in this way. The sarcasm is, if you are able on your part to put riders on them. Now, if you're careful, you could actually understand this, that Hezekiah, the Judah, may not have 2,000 riders in Jerusalem. That is the sarcasm that's coming out in verse 23. Verse 24. How then can you drive back even 1 general, I would say this word official in verse 24 would be the smallest of my master's servants. One, well, we could say one general would be a good way of expressing this. Of the least, the smallest troop of my master's servants in the army, and rely on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Do you think you can actually rely on Egypt for this? You can't even get 2,000. Have I now come up without the Lord's approval? Now, this is where things turn interesting. Did I not come without Jehovah's approval against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. Herein lies what is commonly known as false prophecy. This is the arrogant words of Rabshakeh. If you go back and read Isaiah in chapter 7, verse 17, chapter 8, verse 7, and Isaiah would have said that a long time ago, and these people would have heard, particularly Rabshakeh, he was using the prophecy of Isaiah to say that God is allowing the king of Assyria to come to conquer the place. But he added this. He added that the Lord said to me, go up against this land to destroy it. Obviously, God never said. Unfortunately, even people in those days tend to put words into God's mouth. I think they became too arrogant for their own weight, their own authority that was given by the king of Assyria, that in talking to the southern kingdom, the people of Judah, that he could actually claim that he has a divine instruction of God to destroy them. And God never told Hezekiah that they will be destroyed. Verse 26. And then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiyahu, Shevna, and Yoach said to Rabshakeh, interestingly, speak now to your servants in Aramaic, because we understand it. Do not speak with us in Judean, so that the people who are on the wall hear you. So understand there are two languages here. One is Aramaic, which is the language of the Chaldeans, meaning people like the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and people in those areas speak Aramaic. In Judah, they actually speak Yahudit, which is Hebrew. Now, the people in Judah on the wall will understand. So they are speaking from the wall. So we could say this on the wall. And they were having these conversations to each other. And so if they are too loud, everybody gets to hear. And so if they speak Aramaic, then only they can understand. Now, what is the difference between Aramaic and Hebrew? They are both sister language, Semitic language. In the same family of the Semitic language would include Aramaic, Hebrew, and Arabic later on. You find that Aramaic and Hebrew shares a lot of commonalities, but they are absolutely two different languages. Although if you knew Hebrew, you could read a bit of Aramaic. And if you know Aramaic, you might know some Hebrew. They share common words, but not all. But what is interesting here is people in Judah doesn't know Aramaic at this time, but Eliakim and Shevna and Yoach, they all know. Verse 27, and then Rabshakeh said to them, has my master sent me to your master and to you speak these words? Has he not also sent me to the men who sit on the wall, which is around them? doomed to eat their own dung and drink their own urine with you. Now, this is a very, I would say, Eastern way of speaking, that when you refer to something as dung and urine, it means that you are totally helpless. No food to eat and nothing to drink. You eat your own dung and you drink your own urine. That you will all lose in this battle. That is the taunt that's coming up from Rav Sheker. And then Rav Sheker stood up and shouted with a loud voice in Hebrew. And the idea is to scare them. Everyone. He says, hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to save you from my hand. Verse 30, and do not let Hezekiah lead you to trust in God, trust in Jehovah, by saying, the Lord will certainly save us, and this city will not be handed over to the king of Assyria. This is a mockery to God. So it's mocking the king, it's mocking God. It says, do not listen to Hezekiah, for this is what the king of Assyria says. Make your peace. Now, this word here in verse 31 says, make your blessing with me. This word peace is really blessing. Make your blessing with me. So it's not peace in verse 31. The idea here means if you bless me, then we don't have to fight. Bless me and come out to me and eat. And what that means is you are now free to each one eat from his vine, eat from his fig tree, and drink each one of you from the waters of his own cistern. So literally it says, make your blessing with me. If you bless me, then we are good. We have peace until I come and take you to a land like your own land, a land of grain, a new wine, a land of bread and vineyard, a land of olive trees producing oil of honey, so that you will live and not die. What does that mean? This means that they will be taken into exile and possibly what we call a dispersion. Like in chapter 17, when Shalmaneser came, he removed many of them from the land and then replaced them with the Goyim from other lands that he had conquered. And so this is what the Rav Shakeh says. Yes, if we say peace, then you can go. But he says, do not listen to Hezekiah because he misleads you by saying, Jehovah will save us. Jehovah will deliver us. Now, why would Hezekiah say that? Is because he has put his trust in Jehovah. Rav Sheker is telling them, you can't depend on Jehovah. So the mockery on God comes when God will defend himself. He goes on to argue, has any of the gods of the nations actually saved his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? Meaning, the king of Assyria has been going out to conquer places. And in chapter 17, these are the people who had worshipped the gods of Hamat, the god of Arphat, and then the gods of the Sepharvaim, the gods of Hena, the gods of Eva. Have they saved Samaria from my hand? So what basically it means is these are the people that the king of Assyria had conquered, moved them into the northern kingdom, took the people in the northern kingdom, moved them out to Medes. They will live, but they will not be able to regroup and fight ever again. Who among all the gods in the lands are there who can save their land from my hand? Now he's speaking on behalf of the king of Assyria, remember? A mal'ak, a messenger, one who speaks on behalf of the master, that Jehovah could save Jerusalem from my hand. These arrogant words is a mockery to God. And so he speaks this in Hebrew. In verse 36, the people were silent and did not answer him even a word, because it was the king's command, do not answer him. Now, this is important for us to take note. This word silent, the word silent means he caused themselves to be dumb. So they pretended to be dumb or dumbfounded to give the impression to Rabshakeh, to tell the king of Assyria, they are all very scared. They have no reply, basically. We now come to our last verse for today. And I want us to understand what really is happening before we end. In verse 37, it is very difficult for these people to listen to the mocking of Rabshakeh. And then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the household, Shebna, the scribe, who became a traitor, and Joach, the son of Asaph, the recorder, came to Hezekiah with their clothes torn. Now, this expression, with their clothes torn, is a very Eastern way. When you tear your clothes, it is out of anger, it is out of grief, it's immense grief, and it's immense disappointment. Now, one of the things you will find is that people, when they get angry, you can look at the face. And so we often see the expression, the nose is long. But when you come across news like this and it impacts you, like God is going to destroy Nineveh in 40 days, or overthrow Nineveh in 40 days, the king would take off his clothes and put on sackcloth. So the emotional expressions in the Bible, as it's been described, is demonstrated by actions. Now, you can't see a frustration inside a person, but you could see it when clothes are being torn, ripped in two. Then you could actually look visually and interpret that as an immense anger, or an immense grief, or an immense disappointment. And in this case, as they were silent, they had to swallow their saliva and swallow their words and don't reply, don't fight them. It is very difficult for them to handle. But the king said so, do not reply. And so they came and they tore their clothes just to demonstrate to the king that they are very unhappy with the words of Rabshakeh. Now, understand this. Again, I want to point out to all of us, the words of Rabshakeh is not his own words. He is but a messenger. And a messenger is a mal'ak. A mal'ak is one who walks on behalf of the one in authority who sent him. And so Rabshakeh is speaking on the authority of the king of Assyria, Sennacherib. And he has mocked Hezekiah. He has mocked God, two of which these people who represent Hezekiah is very respectful and honorable, especially God. Especially God, that they are saying that God had told them that they can come and destroy Jerusalem. The mocking was too much for them, and so the displeasure was displayed by tearing their clothes. We learn a little bit about engagements, mockery, not to put words into God's mouth. Don't say what God did not say. Rav Shakeh had said that God told him that he's going to come to destroy the place. Granted, God is allowing the Assyrians to come, but only if they had not repented. And so, like in the northern kingdom of Israel, they did not repent, and Shalmaneser did just that. In the southern kingdom, with now Hezekiah, they haven't done anything against God. And so Hezekiah's confidence is on God, but faced with a reality that in actuality, they are facing a hopeless situation. Now, they have not learned how hopeless it is yet. As of now, they are already feeling hopeless. But in the coming chapters, you would find that the hopelessness is 1,000 more times worse than in chapter 18. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.